Hey guys, welcome to the channel. Today we're gonna see what if Issei was never resurrected part 9. Before I start, if you like these types of videos, please subscribe to the channel and like the video. Also share this video with your friends. Let's start the video. Rias world, DXDUI verse 14, husband. The world went through Rias' mind. So in this world she actually had to marry Razor. She wasn't sure how to feel about this, but it didn't really matter right now. I am sorry for putting it in, that was my lady, but you look terrible. She was fully taking in Rias' state, the barely healed injuries, the clothes she had gotten from the wizard guild when they had been taking care of her, clothes that didn't completely fit her. If you have been attacked, just tell us who it was, one of the pawns asked her. She looked at Razor's queen and the two pawns, the Nekomata twins of his peerage. Rias knew what she had to do. Yubaluna-san, there is something I have to tell you, she began. You will probably not believe me. Yes, Lady Rias. Rias wasn't sure how Razor's queen would take this information. She would most likely think she was crazy. But if the last experience had taught her something, then that it was better to tell the truth about herself as early as possible. The last thing she needed was being accused of trying to impersonate the local Rias Gremory, once again. I am not your Lady Rias. At least not the one you know, she said to them. I am. Oh, and who are you then? The pawn named Lee asked her. She sounded more than a bit amused with her question, and Rias could make out a thin smile on her face. It was not exactly the tone that you would expect from a devil servant towards the wife of her king. But ironically, Rias was happy about the reaction. If they were willing, and able, to act to her like this, then her counterpart in this world was most likely different than the last one she had met. I am the Rias Gremory from an alternate world, she finally stammered. I have just arrived here, as I had to flee from a dangerous enemy. Their reaction was once again a bit different from what she had expected. Yubaluna's and the others' expression was completely blank for a moment. Then smirks formed on their faces, and finally they broke out into howling laughter. That's just great, Ni commented, snorting. I think Lord Razor is right, Lady Rias. You have seen too many of these Japanese science fiction stories, Yubaluna declared, still giggling. There is no such thing as too many Japanese science fiction mangas, Rias declared loudly with some theatrical mock conviction. Or anything else Japanese, she added silently. She wasn't exactly happy with being laughed at by Razor's servants, but she by far preferred it to being imprisoned again. This is not some kind of attempt to get out of your promise, isn't it? Yubaluna's expression suddenly turned more serious. What are you talking about? Ah, so you pretend you don't remember now. I am talking about the double date you have promised me with you and Lord Razor, of course. And what will come afterwards, she added a bit quieter and with an a bit lascively undertone. Of course Rias knew what she meant. It was common knowledge under high-class devils that Yubaluna was Razor's main mistress, under many others. And that was obviously the case in this world too. And her counterpart was obviously willing to get along with it. So my other self has promised you a date and afterwards a threesome with Razor and her. Rias stated. I am not joking here. I am truly not her. Just bring me to Razor and you will see. When there are two of me there. Oh, of course. Lady Rias, Ni replied, still giggling. But Master Razor might decide to make it a foursome instead then. I am sure he has always dreamt about the chance to haze two of you at once, Lee added, grinning widely. Certainly not, Rias shouted. I am not Razor's wife where I come from, and we are not together. Sure, Yubaluna replied. Don't you think it is enough of the joke? Just bring me to Razor, she sighed. At least nobody could claim now that she tried to impersonate her counterpart, she thought. XXX a few minutes later, after Razor's servants, along with Rias, had teleported away, another portal was forming in the air. We have done it, Issei said a few moments later, after he and the others had passed through it. Yes, and we are back in Kuo, Ravel stated. Rias is close by, Kiba said. We have found her. XXXXXXX Devil Issei's world. DXD Universe 006, Rainier, Gariel and the others were now standing in front of two devil peerages. One of them led by nobody else than Cyroorg Biel. The other however included exactly the person they had been looking for, the Issei Hyodo of this world. They had just explained the reasons to them why Issei and the rest of their team were not with them and how they would meet up with them later. Now tell us, how have things been in your world since we met you the last time? Rainier asked him. Issei said nothing for a moment. After we had returned, Irina and I brought that murderer's body to Sirzex and the other Mao, he finally said. We gave them a report about what happened and confirmed that it was him who had killed Rias, Asia and the others. He kept himself from speaking out the name of his friend's murderer, because Cyroorg's peerage was there. The reason for this was quite simple. One of Cyroorg's knights, his name was Liban Cressel. Like the fallen angel hybrid Alec Cressel had been, he was a surviving member of the same now practically extinct clan of the 73 Pillars. I was there to confirm the identity of the killer as well, Sona stated. Afterwards the tension between the three factions waned down a bit, as it became known that neither of the other factions had been responsible for Rias' murder. I see, Gariel replied. Can you tell us why you are here? Sona wanted to know. A few days ago an incident occurred on church territory, Gariel stated. A number of criminals had been freed who the Vatican wanted to lock away. She made sure not to give any clearer information where and how this happened, just in case the secret prison existed in this reality as well. And revealing this information to a devil would certainly not help the situation between the factions. Right afterwards the attackers seemingly vanished without trace from our world, which caused the Vatican to call us. As it turned out, these unknown attackers had traveled to your reality. Other dimension travelers? Sona questioned. I admit I had been quite skeptical when I heard this story. Had they something to do with this Alec Cressel? This caused two people present to look up. The first was Issei's counterpart, the other was Liban. Issei knew that Liban Cressel was not Alec Cressel. They were not even from the same universe. On a rational level he knew this. But a part of him could still not stop feeling wary around Cyroorg's knight. XXX Liban himself on the other side had been ashamed as he heard that it had been a member of his clan who was responsible for such crimes. Alec Cressel's counterpart who had existed in this world, was a distant cousin, he had never met in person and who had died a long time ago. There had no sign been found that this version of Alec had ever been involved with any interdimensional forces. He had just been an outsider between the factions and the races, who didn't really seem to belong anywhere. Still, the knowledge that it had been technically a relative of him, who had not only murdered the sister of one of the Mao and her entire peerage, a group of teenagers, but with this intentionally risked a new war, was eating heavily on Liban. And going by Hyodo's and Irina Shithu's reports, this was only a part of the long list of crimes of this man. XXX. We don't know who they are, it was Rainier who answered. It is possible. But it could also be a completely different group that is able to travel between the worlds. The only thing we know for sure is that this group had materialized in this world somewhere close to the Vatican in Rome, Gariel stated. Excuse me, but if that is the case, why have you appeared here in Kuo? Cyroorg asked, joining the conversation. Because here at least is someone we know personally, she replied, looking at issei. While on the other side we never had any direct contact with the Church of your reality and cannot know how they would react to us. In their own home universe, the Guardians had secretly been in contact with the Church for a longer time by now. But here this was not the case. And given the fact that our team includes fallen angels and devils, we didn't found it a good idea to just show unannounced up right in the heart of Church territory, Rainier added. So we decided to find you first and check the situation. I see, issei, replied. I guess it is the best when I contact Irina then. By the way, how are things between Irina and you going? Zenobia asked now. Very good. The smile that formed on his face as he said this, told more than his words did. So you are together? Zenobia asked him. We are friends, issei said. You mean that kind of friends? Rainier asked him pointedly, making the true meaning of her statement all too clear. Yes, that kind of friends, Sona confirmed in his stead. But Hyodo-san avoids talking about it in public. For good reasons. A relationship between a devil, even a reincarnated one, and a church exorcist is difficult, even dangerous. There had been a similar relationship once, that ended up with both getting murdered. We can mention it here, since the members of mine and Cyroorg's peerages can be trusted. But please don't talk about it anywhere else. Okay, we will remember that, Rainier answered. But you should really contact her now, Gariel added. We need to get to Rome and then we have to find these intruders, whoever they are. XXXXXXX Rias world all what Ubaluna, the Nekomata twins, the Rook Schwalen, their master Razor Phoenix, and Rias servants, Akano, Kaneko and Kiba Kadu, was starring from their lady Rias to the newcomer and back. Issei's counterpart was nowhere to see. Of course it was good possible that she had never recruited him in this world, Rias reminded herself. Maybe he was still human, maybe Rainier had never targeted him, maybe she and her team never even came to Kuo. The Rias of this world, along with Akano, had just returned to their club in Kuo Academy, to meet up with her husband. What she didn't expect was to literally run into herself. I don't believe it, Ubeluna whispered. Rias gave her a small smile, that meant as much as, I told you so. What in the world is the meaning of this? Razor said quite sharply. Master Razor, I think I explained better exactly what this person here, Rias, has told us, Ubeluna tried to explain. You won't believe this story when you hear it. Well, we didn't either. But, she was once again looking from one Rias to the other. Don't waste my time Ubeluna, he responded impatiently. Do you know who this person is? And why does she look exactly like my wife? That is something I would like to know myself, the native Rias stated. I have not expected to came back home and literally walk into myself. This is not some kind of prank from you, isn't it Akano? She addressed her queen. No, I have nothing to do with this. And even if I wanted to, I am not sure how to pull something like this up. I mean, sure, she looks like you. That is one thing. But even her energy is the same. Akano is right, native Kaneko said. She is. Exactly the same as you Bucko. Exactly, Razor stated. So what in the world is going on? If this isn't some stupid joke, then what? Impersonating a high-class devil is an insolence of the highest rank. So you better have a good explanation, whoever you are. And you better answer quick, he said to Rias in a threatening tone. Razor, that is enough. Rias said to him. You have to excuse my husband. He can be a bit of a jerk sometimes. But you have to admit he has a point, you should truly explain a few things to us. I already told Ubeluna, Rias replied. She can tell you. It is your choice if you believe her or not. She had to admit, she already liked this counterpart of her far more than the last one she met. Even if she was now Mrs. Razor Phoenix. Had she simply lost her rating game against him and they were married afterwards? Since Issei didn't seem to be part of the peerage, that was good possible. XXX a few minutes, and several explanations. Later, the assembled devils were only staring at Rias. And also at Ubeluna, who had told them her story. In bewilderment. Do you actually expect us to believe this nonsense? Razor asked. I know how it sounds Razor. But think about it like this. If I were a spy or something, why should I tell you a story that I know is completely unbelievable? You know that I am not some kind of imposter, since I completely admitted from the start that I am not your Rias. You have to admit she has a point here darling, Rias told him. Razor sat down on one of the ORC's chairs. I think I am getting a headache, he said. I start to think two of you are truly too much my dear, he said in Rias' direction. You are the one who was pushing for our engagement, Rias reminded him. True. But I wanted only one Rias Gremory, not two, he responded with a sly grin. As if you had never fantasized about having two of me at once, Rias remarked smugly. Or do you fear it would be truly too much for you? Rias nearly felt as if the floor was pulled away under her, as she saw these two flirting with each other. She actually married him willingly. She realized. Or at least she was happy with him now. She could barely believe it. She knew with all these different worlds, there were many things possible. But seeing herself, being willingly with the prick and even flirting with him, that was something that she had never really considered. Excuse me, Rias said, I have a question. Have you ever heard of the names Issei Hyodo or maybe Rainier? Oh yes, I remember that names, Rias replied. Rainier is a fallen angel and was the leader of a group that appeared in Kuo some time ago. And Hyodo was one of our Kohei at this school for a bit over a year. And a sacred gear user, she added. I had thought about recruiting him for some time. Only that this Rainier beat you to it, right? The native Akano added. And later it turned then out that he was the Red Dragon Emperor. She doesn't like to admit it, but Bucko is still sour about that she didn't ask him sooner. That didn't sound much different than what had happened in the last world, Rias thought. Only that her counterpart here wasn't the same murderous bitch. Had this Issei been together with the Rainier of this world as well? Or had she merely been introducing him to the Grigori? Had she pretended to ask him out to get close to him and played the part of his girlfriend, like their own Rainier had done it in the beginning? It was impossible to tell now. And frankly it made no real difference for her right now. In this moment they all sensed the group of presences outside. "It seems we have guests," Razor stated casually. "Well, I don't think they will cause any trouble. Who in their right mind would dare to challenge 3 devil peerages on their own territory? One of them belonging to the great Razor Phoenix. It is nice to see that you are humble as always, dear husband," Rias commented sarcastically. "You don't need to be alarmed," Rias told them. "These are my friends. They are just here to find me and bring me back home." "Really?" Razor responded. "Now I am truly curious to see them. Ubaluna, why don't you lead them in?" He sat down on the couch, visibly stretching out his legs. "Of course, Lord Razor," his queen answered loud. "Schwalen, my dear, how about you bring me a coffee?" He asked his rook, who smiled and followed his order immediately. But rolled her eyes at her master's antics, as soon as she had turned around. This was typical Razor. He acted as if whoever was outside would not even be a threat. Of course she knew that Issei and the others could easily rip him apart if they had wanted. Issei had already easily defeated another version of him months ago. And Rias doubted that this one was that much stronger. "XXX, by the way, my lady," Ubaluna whispered as she walked across Rias, "our threesome for tonight stands, right?" Rias gave her a meaningful smile in return. "Of course, I promised after all," she said. Far too much information, Rias thought silently. Far too much information. Excuse me?" She stepped closer to her counterpart and whispered to her, "Can I ask you a question in private?" "Ah, yes. Of course," she answered. "I am sorry, but this is just unusual." She sounded visibly uneasy for a moment, as she ended her sentence. "I know," Rias replied. "I felt the same way when I talked to myself the first time. You get used to it after a while." They had now moved to the other side of the room, away from Razor and the others, who was currently drinking his coffee, that Schwalen had served him. "Make no mistake," Rias answered. "I am still not sure if I believe your story. I sounds just too fantastic. But what do you want to ask?" "Well, you and Razor, have you married him willingly? I mean, I don't want to question your choices, but me and the Razor I know, never went along." That was putting it lightly, she thought. "Oh yes, I know what you mean," Rias responded. "I admit in the beginning I hated him as well. I thought of him as nothing but an arrogant jerk who saw me only as a price, as a womanizer and someone who only wanted me for my status." "What has changed?" Rias asked her. "A few things. For once, our families arranged for us to actually spend time together," she explained. "At first I still found him insufferable. But over time, I started to see things different. I also got to talk with Ubaluna and the other girls. From them I found out that, aside from his arrogant behavior, he actually cared deeply about them and treated them with respect. Well, outside of his bed. Many of them also served as his mistresses. But the ones who did, are doing it willingly and he never pressured them. You know, I had always been going on about his womanizing ways. But then I realized, I don't really care about them actually. To be honest, I think I have only used that as an excuse because I was afraid to be controlled by him. The truth is, I have no problem to share my husband with his other lovers, as long as I know he loves me and am sure about my place as his wife." She shrugged with her shoulders. Yes, that made sense, Rias thought. In fact, she believed it was actually deeper than that. She had sometimes asked herself how her older self from the future timeline had resented Razor so much for being a womanizer, and then fallen completely for Issei, an even more notorious womanizer and self-proclaimed pervert. And then joined his harem of currently over a dozen girls and women. But that was not even the beginning. Future Rias had admitted to her that, from the beginning, she had actually liked it. No, that deep down, she was excited about the thought of sharing Issei with her friends and servants. Why not? After all, they were all family to her. And if the other girls loved Issei as well, she would gladly allow them to be with him as well. It was a load of bullocks, she remembered her older counterpart stating right afterwards. Not that she didn't truly love Issei and the other girls, her friends, as well. She did. But that wasn't the true reason she was sharing him so easily and willingly. The truth was, the entire idea of sharing him with the other girls flattered her self-image. And the thought of being the undisputed number one of his many lovers, in a perverted way, boosted her ego far more than being his only one. After all, it had been Issei's dream to have a harem, and she had offered it to him. He could enjoy his harem because she gave it to him. And the other girls could enjoy him because she allowed it. She had even told her about the fantasies she sometimes had. About herself sitting in a throne-like chair, watching Issei having his way with the other girls, who were nearly always clad in hot underwear, lingeries and stockings, and Akano, Kaneko, Asia, Zenobia or Rossweiss often thanking her for it, while he was fucking them. Of course, after her great breakdown, in every sense of the word, these fantasies had turned into the exact opposite. With herself, instead of being his "wife and harem queen," being his lowliest mistress, the one who is gladly taking care of his lowest and dirtiest urges. From what her older counterpart told her and even some of the memories she had shown to her, she knew that they quite often had group sex, mostly because with so many women, it would take a long time to make out individual dates for all of them. And none of the girls wanted to wait so long, with herself often letting the others have their turn first, with herself being the very last. And then having Issei take her in the most degrading ways possible. And she was enjoying every second of it, sometimes even making competitions with Akano in that regard. Of course, future Rias was also batshit insane in many ways. Her older counterpart's own words. Rias Gremory. She thought sarcastically, heir of the Gremory family, sister of the strongest Mao, and completely perverted harem mistress, who was getting off on sharing her man with her friends and servants. But the worst part was that now she was sometimes even catching herself having similar fantasies. About Issei and his harem. And sometimes even about Razor. And by what it looked like, her counterpart here was actually making such fantasies come true. Damn, she was a pervert, she admitted to herself. Maybe all Rias Gremories in the multiverse were perverts, she thought. XXX, but things really started to change, when Razor made a decision he regretted deeply later, Rias continued, interrupting her thoughts. What decision? Rias wanted to know. He challenged Cyroorg to a duel, Rias told her with a bit mean grin. Let me guess, he got a real reality check then? He did. His behavior however became much more tolerable after that. But it was also the first time I have seen him actually vulnerable and able to talk to like a normal person. Ubaluna had told me later that his Phoenix powers had been slowly getting to his head in the past and made him think he was invincible. But after his defeat, this started to change. But what truly turned me around was what happened a short time later. Rias was looking at her curiously. Members of the old Satan faction had started an assault on the underworld. Being who we are, me, Akano, Kiba and Kaneko had of course been right at the front line. I was careless, like so often. I nearly got myself and them killed, she sighed. But then came Razor. He, Ubaluna and Schwalen fought with everything they had to save us, even when being badly outnumbered and against dangerous opponents who could, in one way or the other, overcome his regeneration. So you fell for him because he fought for you, because he risked his life for you? No, Rias answered, surprising Rias. Yes, he did that. But that wasn't the main reason. On this day I learned something about myself. A lesson I didn't like. I am just as arrogant as Razor. I am just better at hiding it. So I have hardly a right to judge him for it. Actually, I finally realized how similar we are in many ways. From that time on, we were a couple. Truly one, instead of just an official one. In some ways you could say, we are keeping each other in check and holding the other on the ground. XXX. A few moments later, the group of native devils were getting another shock. Our Revel? Razor said, completely perplexed as he saw the exact double of his sister, who had just entered the room. But he knew perfectly well that Revel was in the underworld, with their family. He had just been talking with her just before he came here to meet with his wife and her servants. The others were also starring at the second Kiba and at Issei, who was in front of the group of visitors. Ahm. Hi Oni-chan. Even if it's not really you, it is nice to see you, she greeted him a bit uneasily. It seems the story is actually true, they heard Akano stating. Kiba, Issei, Rias called out happily as she saw them. They had found her, they had truly found her. She ran forward and threw her arms around her teammates. You have found me, she cried. You have actually found me. I am so glad to see you again. Issei Hyodo? Rias said surprised. It is you? Yes, does this surprise you? Well, Rias? He asked the native Gremory heiress. It is just, you are with the fallen angels. And you have not been seen in Kuo since you and your parents have left the town. But I am not the Issei Hyodo you are talking about, he said, with a side glance at the Rias standing next to him. I see, Rias responded. This is just crazy, Razor said quietly. So you are truly from another universe. His earlier arrogance had no completely fallen off from him. You can say that, Razor-san, Issei stated confidently. It is nice to see you back, Agan as well. But I fear we don't have much time. Issei-kun, where are the others? Rias asked him. She saw his face falling for a moment. Irina, Akano and Calawarner have gone missing along with you, he told her. Irina had been the first we have managed to find. You are the second. Rainier, Gariel and the others have gone to a mission to another universe. We have separated from them to get you first and will meet with them now. Kaneko had stayed behind in our world to help locate her sister and inform her that the charges against her had been dropped, he continued. Akano and Calawarner are still missing. I see, she said. Akano, she thought. We will find them, he promised her. You heard it. We have to leave now, Oni-san, Ravel said to her brother, and the others. Goodbye. Issei activated his control device and a portal formed right inside the room. It was nice to meet you, Razor-san, Issei told them before he walked through it, closely followed by the others. Like Issei-kun said, it was nice to talk to you, Rias said, following the others through the portal, right before it disappeared. The native devils were just staring at the empty spot where their visitors had been a few seconds before. Well, that was something quite unusual, Rias commented. Yes darling, Razor, said tonelessly. XXXXXXX. DXD Universe 006 somewhere in Italy. Now, have you found something? The leader of the group called the Devil Hunters, nobody else than an alternate version of Valley Lucifer, asked. Only that it won't be easy to come close to our target, Fried responded. Still, I guess me and my compatriots here have still a far better chance than you. Behind him were the other 3 stray priests who had survived their breakout from the Vatican prison. It is unbelievable. Nobody is even paying attention to me while I am walking through the town. I guess being dead truly has its advantages, right? He started to laugh manically. That is enough, Fried, Valley responded. We are here for a mission after all. Oh yes, the mission. He chuckled. And I have to thank you with my whole heart for this chance. I have never thought I would be part of something like this. Ha ha ha. Of the 4 surviving stray priests, only Fried was actually considered an actual official member of their group. The other 3 were simply cannon fodder, to be used and discarded if necessary. The rest of their team had assembled. It was a team put together from different realities, collected from the realities the Erebos had visited. The only thing truly connecting them to each other was their shared hate for the devil race. And that was exactly what the Erebos had been aiming for as they created this group. The purpose of the Devil Hunters was twice-fold. The first part was simply to travel from reality to reality and kill as many devils as possible. The other one, however, was more complex, to infiltrate and destabilize entire societies with precise strikes, slowly making these worlds ready for the Erebos to invade. Like right now. Valley was, like in many other universes, the White Dragon Emperor and host of Albion. But also a half-breed child of devil and human, considered little more than a bastard by both his father and grandfather and treated as a tool his whole childhood. Despite both his devil and half-breed heritage, he was tolerated and even supported as the leader of the team, for exactly 2 reasons: his power and skill and his deep hatred for them. A short distance from him were sitting 2 young girls, both of them yokai, Nekomata. They were nobody else than versions of Kuroka and her sister Kaneko. The 2 sisters were sitting more than just closely together, with Kuroka's arms wrapped around the younger catgirl, while she was practically sitting on her lap. On the first look it was a sweet scene, that made the 2 girls look close, even for sisters, and innocent. But Valley knew perfectly well, that a great part of this scene was actually a bittersweet lie. The truth was Kuroka came from the same world as him and they both went a long way back. To be exact, she was the only one in their team who came from the same world as him. Before the Erebos demons had found and recruited them, they had been part of the same outlaw group. XXX Kuroka's sister Sharon had been killed by the devils, after Kuroka, who, along with her little sister, had been part of a devil's peerage at that time, had killed their former master as he was performing dangerous life-threatening experiments on Sharon. The devils, however, had spread the lie that she had simply gone insane by the use of senjutsu. And so they had claimed that every use of it and every Nekomata was a possible threat, and several noble devil families had demanded Sharon's execution. Her little sister had been murdered because of a lie. Later, after they had first formed the Devil Hunters, the first thing Kuroka did after they had removed her evil pieces and restored her to her original state, was taking revenge on these nobles. And Valley had gladly assisted her doing it. With the help of their new masters and allies, they had hunted them down and killed them one by one. In a few cases they had wiped out their entire households. As the Erebos finally decided that they had killed enough devils in their own universe, they had been sent to other worlds, and also started to recruit new members, to replace the ones they had lost in their first campaign. Today only he and Kuroka were left from the beginning. As they had then recruited a counterpart of her sister, her story nearly mirroring her own, only in that world it had been Kuroka who had been hunted down and killed. They nearly instantly clinged to each other. It was nearly as if they both used the other to fill the emptiness in themselves. The fact that Kuroka used her pet name Kaneko for her, instead of Sharon, was the only outer sign that she recognized the fact that this was not truly her real sister, but an alternate version of her. Also, whenever the two "sisters" were out on missions together against their enemies, they also could together reach a viciousness and bloodthirst that even surpassed his own by far. Sometimes, as close as he and Kuroka were, in every sense of the word, he admitted he had doubts about both their sanities. Well, no matter if she and Kaneko were crazy or not, Valley admitted that he loved Kuroka more than any other person he knew. The next member of her team was a silent masked figure in black robes, who was only calling himself Nero. He was by far the most mysterious of their group. He was nearly always wearing his mask and the others actually knew very little of him, except that he possessed notable magic powers, used exorcist weapons and was just as bent on killing devils as the rest of them. The last member of the team admitted that by now she regretted that she had ever joined them, the fallen angel named Middlet. When they had first found her, she had been hiding herself somewhere in an abandoned building, after the battle with Kokebiel's forces. She had been terrified to be captured and executed for treason for her alliance with the rogue Kadri. Looking back, she had only joined him from the beginning out of fear for her life, but damn it, she had been even willing to murder Calawarner, her teammate, to save her own skin. And later it was Calawarner who had let her go. She had felt lower than dirt at that time. It was then that the Devil Hunters had found her. Their offer sounded actually very good at the beginning. They had offered to bring her away from her own world, where a potential death sentence for treason was hanging over her head. In exchange they only wanted basic information about the Grigori and the other factions, not even military secrets, but just basic facts. And her use as a warrior. And her help in killing devils, who were enemies of her race anyway. They had even given her the promise not to use whatever information she gave them against the fallen angels of her own reality. She should have known that it sounded too good to be true. First she had been forced to break fucking Fried Selzen of all people out of a secret, or not so secret, since the Grigori had found out about its existence and location a couple of years ago. Vatican prison. Together with a bunch of other loony stray exorcists. After she was the one who told them about the prison in the first place. And now she was here, in a parallel world with them, at the center of the Catholic faith of all places. And they were about to do something that could throw this world into chaos. They were actually going to assassinate the Pope and make it look as if the devils were responsible. XXXXXXX somewhere else they arrived. With the glowing up of a large transport circle, the group of Rainier, Gariel, Murayama and Zenobia, together with the native version of Issei and a bit surprisingly Kuroka, appeared in Italy, close to Rome. As it turned out, Issei had come across the Kuroka of this world in the time they hadn't seen him. Actually it was her who had found him. She had heard about what had happened to her sister and wanted to talk with the only present who had been present as it happened. So they had talked. And Issei had found out about her innocence. And finally he had managed to give proof of it to the Mao and got her pardon. Afterwards she had decided to move in with the Hyodo family in a guest room. Under normal circumstances, she would have most likely already become a member of Issei's harem. She had in every case made her interest in him very clear. If it were not for the fact that he had, after the death of the others, put a pause on his plans for the time being. A small group was awaiting them as they arrived, consisting of this world's version of Irina Shidu, who instantly greeted Issei with a hug. Their Zenobia, and standing behind them were a man in a white coat and a woman in nun clothes. Nobody else than Giulio Gesualdo, the church's strongest exorcist, and Griselda Quarta, strongest female exorcist and Zenovia's guardian. "I am so glad that you are here, Issei-kun," Irina said to him. So the story you have told us is actually true, Dulio stated, looking from one Xenovia to the other. XXXXXXX Akino's World. DXD Universe 15. They just met up with two girls who Akino easily recognized as Murayama and Katase. But she had nearly instantly the feeling that these ones would be completely different from the ones she knew. Rias, they called out as they saw them, greeting their friend. How are you? We have barely talked with you in the last days, Katase said to her. In the last days, yes, since Akino had arrived. She had been a bit distracted in that time. Yes, you didn't even come to us to watch the boys as they were changing after sport, Murayama added. They were truly the equivalent of the perverted trio, Akino thought. I was, well, a bit distracted in the last time, human Rias responded. But not anymore, she grinned. Okay, Katase replied happily. I am sure you are glad to spend some time away from this stuck-up bitches. Who are you calling stuck-up bitches? Akino asked them with a glare. Oh no, Hamejima-senpai is angry at us, Murayama called out mockingly. What will she do to us now? Katase fell in. She will probably crush us with these giant boobs she has, Murayama exclaimed. They are deadly weapons after all. Would you shut up, you sluts? Akino yelled at them. A grin formed on her face then. Even if you are right, these things are lethal, she said, while pushing her hands under her own chest. This caused the three perverted girls to smile lascively. That is the right mindset, Akino-senpai, Katase said loudly. Maybe you are not so stuck up as we thought after all. Oh please, Akino thought. She clearly preferred the version of these girls she knew, she decided. But she also knew they had completely other worries. She had exchanged a few looks with issei, as she recognized him turning his eyes away from their group a few times. You have noticed it as well, right? She whispered to him. That someone is following us? Yes I did, he responded. Rias had noticed it as well. Rias. Don't let the way she acts deceive you, he said. She is quite powerful. The question is who are they and why are they interested in us? Well, maybe we should go and ask them. What do ya think? The human version of Rias asked them. XXX in some distance, the two figures did not realize that they had been detected. This is the interloper, one of them, a woman looking in her mid-20s, said. Akino Hamejima. But she is not the same one we have observed earlier. Clearly not, her partner, a young man, said. Both of them were Erebos demons, who were currently in human form. This one has been turned into one of the half-breed devils. Not only is an intruder from another dimension here, it is also one of them. We will report Lord Pazuzu about this. He will most likely only order us to capture her, to find out why she is here and if she knows something. The woman shrugged. But protocols are protocols, right? Devil Issei's World. Universe 006, their group, together with their new allies from this world's church, were now on their way to the first place they intended to see. The secret prison, as both Dulio and Griselda had confirmed, didn't existed in this reality. Or at least not at the same place. But since it was there where the mysterious unknowns had obviously left their world, it was also the most likely spot where they would have arrived in this one, so they would start their search there. As they were on their way, they finally saw something else they had been waiting for. A portal was opening very close to them. And Issei and the others stepped out to rejoin them. They saw to their relief that they had indeed found Rias. She was with the others and like them, visibly happy to see them again. Rias, Gariel greeted her. I see they have found you. At least some good news. Yes, they have. But, for a moment all the things that had happened were going through her mind. She should have been dead many times over. I have been lucky. She is right, Irina stated. We had nearly not been able to get her. If Issei had not been able to, well, do it somehow, then we would probably not even have found the last world she had landed in, she admitted. And then, she didn't need to end the sentence. Rias gulped at her words. She was right, she realized. It had been an incredible luck that they had been able to find her. She had lost her transfer device and would have been lost in that world. They would have continued to search for her, yes. But there would be no telling how long it would have taken them to find her, if at all. Just like with Akano and Calawarner still were. Akano, her best friend and queen, was still out there somewhere, in the same situation like she had been. She could only hope that she and Calawarner had landed in more or less safe worlds. And that they would be able to find them before something happened. She could only hope that they would be able to find them. The terrible memories of Issei's and her own other selves shot through her mind and she felt her hands shaking. She reminded herself that this hadn't been this Issei. She was completely safe with him. They were friends, even if they had their disagreements in the past. But she remembered how she had been at the mercy of this psychopath. How he had hunted her down like an animal. She remembered how he had tortured her counterpart, how she heard the bones of her fingers cracking. For a moment she feared how it could have been, if things were different. If they were different. Meanwhile, several miles away, inside the city, and very close to the Vatican, other things were happening. After having Fried and 2 other stray priests scouting out the environment for a few days, the devil hunters were now ready. Their target was moving in this moment. The Pope of this world was right now returning from a meeting to his residence. Of course, being who he was under guard, visibly and invisibly ones. Besides some clearly visible members of the Papal Guard, who were flanking his heavily armored car. There were also, unknown for normal spectators, disguised exorcists close by. And also several magic spells in the working as protection from potential supernatural attackers. Being the head of the Catholic Church was a job that, at least in this world, required far more protection than regular humans mostly realized. Exactly because of the existence of the other factions and various splinter groups from the supernatural world, that were the Church's enemies. Still, many devils and fallen angels considered the Pope not much more than a puppet of heaven, one that was easily replaced when it came down to. So he was not that much of a major target. But the ultimate goal of the devil hunters was not to actually weaken the Church in heaven. It was to sow chaos and use it against the devils, to weaken them. And the devil hunters were not any splinter group. They were the most dangerous special unit from another reality. Fried and the other stray exorcists went into position, but it were not them who were really important. It were the others, in First Line Valley and Kuroka, who were going to make the real move. The Pope's transport was just crossing a plaza, filled with people. Murayama was in this moment walking through the streets of an alternate Rome, along with Zenobia, Asia, and the native Irina, who acted as something like their guide. They had decided to split into smaller groups. Rainier, Irina and Gariel were taking another route through the city, together with this world's Zenobia and Griselda. While Issei and the others, together with Dulio, would visit the spot where the secret prison had been located in their own world, the rest of them would take a look over the town itself, to look for any signs of these mysterious other group of dimension travelers. Another reason for the split up was that it was unwise for the devils to walk around in the city, right in the center of church territory. Of course the same could be said for the fallen angels, but they were by far not so obvious as the devils and, since they were still basically angels and using light powers, easier to disguise. To that came that they both had exorcists with them who could step in and clear the situation if someone recognized what they were. Devils, however, thanks to their demonic powers, were far easier to recognize. So Rias, Kiba, Ravel and Kuroka were accompanying the Isseis and Dulio, instead of visiting the town itself. Just a few months back, Murayama would have doubted that she would ever even see the Rome of her own world. She had been nothing but a normal girl from a small town in Japan. And now here she was, in another universe. And that with Issei Hyodo of all people. And his girlfriends, or rather his harem. As far as she could remember, the pervert had always been bragging about how he would have one someday. A few months ago, when they had both still been normal high school students, or more or less normal in Issei's case, she would have never in 100 years believed that he would actually get one. And now that he had actually found girls who were willing to go along with it, they were fallen angels, supernatural gifted exorcists and former nuns and devils. Okay, she admitted that Issei was, when you really got to know him, far more tolerable than she had originally thought of him. Actually he was a great guy, well, for the most part. At least as long as he had a hold on himself and did not act like a complete pervert. And she considered him a close friend by now. He had saved her life after all, after she nearly got herself killed. He had been there for her, along with the others, when she got used to her new state. Reinares and to some lesser extent Irina's constant teasing that she would join their harem sooner or later didn't make things much better. To that came that, she had started to admit it to herself, she actually began to be somewhat attracted to him, somewhat at least. She, attracted to Hyodo-kun of all people. Damn it, she could imagine what Katase would say about this, or even worse, Kiryu. While she was walking through the town, she couldn't help herself to let her eyes wander around and take her surroundings. She was in one of the most famous cities in the world after all. But she was for sure not here for sightseeing, she reminded herself. They were here on a mission. She, the interdimensional warrior, who would have thought? But it was not as if there was much actual choice left to her, as her normalcy and her mortality had been lost with her resurrection by Issei. But she could hardly blame him for this. Issei had tried to save her, from her own carelessness, and what had happened to her was out of his control. Have you ever been in Italy before, Murayama-chan? Well, our Italy I mean? Asia asked her friendly. She smiled back. Are you serious? Aside from the time we have spent in the Guardian's world, I have never even been out of Japan, she answered. But I guess that has changed with what we are doing now. I guess, Asia replied. Do you regret it? Murayama asked her, that you have joined this team? I mean, you could have lived a peaceful life somewhere if you wanted after Gariel and Rainier had faked your death. No, I don't, Asia stated. It is, I believe I can help so many people here. And I can be with Issei-kun and the others. In this moment they all sensed it. A line of powers rised up right in the middle of the town. It was an attack. Murayama, Irina addressed her. I sense it too, she replied. This was also one of the abilities she had gained. She could now sense energy. And, to some limit, read minds. They all only needed a moment to decide, and they rushed forward in the direction where they sensed the energies. XXX Meanwhile the four stray exorcists had already shown themselves and moved to attack, while the rest of the devil hunters still stayed hidden in a greater distance, suppressing their powers and their presence. The Pope's guard reacted instantly to the unknown assailants and moved forward to intercept them, just like it was planned. Because with this they were forced to leave a greater distance between themselves and the man they were supposed to protect. And that gave the rest of their team their opening. While the Pope was still sheltered behind strong wards and barriers, but what the Church had not really counted on was possible attackers being ultimate class opponents. Valley, who was standing on a roof a few miles away, with Kuroka next to him. Through the clique he had been disguising himself with a way and then activated his sacred gear and balance breaker, and unleashed a powerful spell that shattered all supernatural defenses around their target. It is your turn, my love, he said to Kuroka, who smiled at him, formed a magic circle beneath her and teleported away. One moment later she reappeared on the street, only a few hundred meters away from the Pope's car, for all to see. We have been tricked, one of the guards engaging the stray priest shouted, realizing what was going on. Another group of church exorcists just arrived and joined the fighting. Joining their comrades, they now struck down two of the stray priests allied with the devil hunters, which however only caused Fried to laugh out and cut down one of them as well in return. It was truly good to be back, he thought. It is a devil, one of the exorcists loyal to the church called out. I recognize her. That is Kuroka, the former stray devil. Kuroka smiled. Yes, it was all going exactly as planned. She activated her powers fully and used them to form a blast, which she unleashed in the direction of the shocked-looking head of the Catholic Church, an elderly human in plain white robes. It was a blast that obliterated everything in its direction, including the Pope. No! A female church fighter shouted as she saw what had happened, but it was already too late. Kuroka's blast had not only killed the Pope, but already completely destroyed his car, the driver and everything around it, and them hit and crumbled a line of building behind them. She wasn't even sure how many bystanders had been killed by her attack. It didn't really matter either. There would be only even more to blame on the devils. Whatever, they had already succeeded here and there was no real reason to stay any longer. XXX At the same time, the group including Murayama, Xenovia, Asia and their "native" guide, this world's Irina, had reached the plaza, where they were greeted by a large crowd of people who had just been watching the events and were staring to get into a panic. What they were also greeted with, was the sight of Fried and the other remaining stray priest, who were running into their direction. As Kuroka had revealed herself and assassinated their target, they had drawn back from their opponents and were retreating now. It was part of the plan, even if Fried had preferred to stay and kill a few more people. Still both Valley and the guy who was pulling the real strings behind this little group had made it pretty clear that they only wanted to stay here as short as possible. But now Fried saw something that put a smile on his face. There was a group of 4 girls before them. One of them he would recognize everywhere. It was nobody else than this little bitch Asia Argento. And there were this 2 exorcist bitches who had beat him back to the Vatican. He didn't recognize the last girl. But he was sure that she possessed some kind of strange power as well. No matter, this would be fun. He raised his weapons and attacked them without warning. The other stray priest followed his example. Murayama, Zenobia, Asia and Irina saw them coming and reacted instantly. Fried's blade was met by Irina's, and his partner's by Murayama. The girl in question was matching a few strikes with the stray priest. This wasn't a kendo match, she reminded herself. This was a life and death fight. So she started to use the power she had inherited from Issei. She was now stronger than a regular girl, at least somewhat. And if she concentrated, she could raise her strength even more. And could move faster than a normal human. She could also read the mind of her enemy. See his thoughts. She knew his movements before he even actually made them. Was she still human? A small doubt came up in her. Both Darien and Issei had told her that she was changed somewhat, different, evolved, but still human. But she couldn't help herself to be unsure. She parried another one of his strikes and then landed a blow at his arm. Meanwhile, Zenobia and Irina were facing Fried, and Asia had drawn a weapon, a short blade, as well. Now Asia, my dear, Fried said with a deep grin, I have never taken you for the type to fight. I have learned it, she replied grimly. How nice. I guess I will leave you alive, so that we can spend some quality time together later. I am curious how your body feels like, now that you have trained it a bit. I already had a small taste after all, if this shitty devils had not interrupted me. Go to hell, Asia hissed at him. XXX. Meanwhile, the church fighters who had been fighting the stray priests a few moments earlier had now surrounded Kuroka, who was a far greater threat. I am sorry, but I have no time to play with you, she said casually to the exorcists. But in this moment Valley, their version of Kaneko and Nero, materialized next to her. A second later Aldo joined by a very reluctant Middlet, who were, if she was honest, rather anywhere else. The small fallen angel was also still wearing her cloak and suppressed her energy to hide the fact that she was a fallen. All this was after all a setup for the devils, and the presence of a member of the Grigori would only put doubt on it. An outbreak of sheer power from Valley alone was forcing the exorcists backwards. His presence was not a problem though. Despite that the Valley Lucifer of this world had been a member of the Grigori, it was known that he had left the organization a short time ago for unknown reasons. And like many of his counterparts, this Valley was as well a known battle fanatic. So the idea that he would join the devils for an attack on the church was not really far-stretched. XXX. At the same time Issei, his counterpart, and the others, who had sensed what was happening even from the distance, had transported themselves to Rome as well. They had appeared close by and were moving now in the direction they were sensing the energies. Rainier, Gariel and Irina had noticed it as well and were just arriving from a different direction, together with Zenobia, and Griselda. After they had run a short distance, they noticed their friends fighting with Fried and his partner. Irina and Zenobia were now fighting Fried and Murayama and Asia, the other stray priest. Murayama parried another few moves from their opponent, until she finally got completely behind his defense and landed a deep cut across his chest. The man sank down with widened eyes. Murayama could literally feel the life leaving him. She was staring at the ground before her for a few moments. The others just noticed that Issei and the rest had arrived. Hyodo. And two of you on top of that, Fried commented. No, this day is truly getting bad. I guess I will take my leave now. You will go nowhere, you bastard, Issei growled. He had his boosted gear already active. Boost. Another boost of power went through his body. As he moved forward, faster as the insane stray priest could follow, and punched him in the gut with enough power to send him several meters backwards and crashing into a wall. I have killed you before, I have no problem to do it again, Issei announced. Then Issei's counterpart materialized his own blade and stepped the surprised Fried into his heart. They all watched as the body of their enemy sank to the pavement. Fried Selzen was dead once again, he thought. Good. He only hoped he would not run into yet another version of this bastard. Killing him twice was truly enough. All except Murayama, who was still standing motionless. She fully realized that she had just killed someone. She had known that it would happen sooner or later, when she wanted to be part of this team, but she had so far convinced herself that it wouldn't happen so soon. They turned around to the group at the other side of the plaza. Valley, Kuroka, Issei said as his fell on them. But Kuroka, at least the one of this world, was standing right next to him. That are them, he said. Middle. Rainier whispered in surprise, as she looked at one of the figures, who was wearing a cloak. And Kaneko, she stated, looking at another small figure, similar disguised. She was sure that the others had noticed it as well. Kuroka certainly did. She noticed her staring at the small figure wordlessly. XXX, we have lost Fried Selzen and the other stray priests, Nero stated. It doesn't matter. They had been not much more than a distraction anyway, Valley said. Let us get out of here. Issei and the others watched as he lifted his left arm and materialized an unknown device on it, that however looked a bit similar to their own controllers, and use it to form another dimension portal. But of course nobody beside them actually knew what it was and thought it was just some bizarre kind of normal transport spell. A second later they were gone. You have seen that? Issei said. Gariel, please tell me you have the data for the universe they had gone to. Of course I have. She smiled at him. It was then, when the crowd, including the guards and exorcists, noticed them. Or more precisely they noticed their world's version of Kuroka standing under them. Hey, there she is, one of them called out. Devils, someone shouted. Murderer. Damn it, Rainier hissed, realizing what was going on. They obviously thought that the attackers had only moved a short distance, and they couldn't tell the difference between this Kuroka and the other one. I think I should have stayed at home, the Nekomata lamented. I think you better should get out of here, Irina said to them. We meet you outside the town, the native Dulio added, after we have cleared this up. XXXXXXX they had assembled once again, a few miles outside of the town, a few hours later. So that is the situation, Dulio explained. And since Kuroka had been seen by hundreds of people, dozens of them fighters for the church, everyone is believing the devils are responsible for the Pope's death. Some might even think that the devils had only accepted Kuroka back for the purpose of her doing this. But we know that is not the case, Issei stated. Yes, Griselda responded. But the general public? I myself are only believing your story since we have two of each of you right before us, she stated with looks at the two Isseis, Zenovias and Irinas. And even I find it crazy. Still, a known member of the devil faction had been seen by many witnesses murdering the Pope. That is not something that will simply disappear. Great, Kuroka commented, just cleared from the one crime and already framed for another. Have you not told them the truth? Kiba asked perplexed. Do you really think we have not tried? Dulio replied. We told them that this had been an impostor. But a few simply don't believe us and think we are only telling this crazy story to avoid a new war. Others believe we are the one who had been deceived by a double and that it had been the real Kuroka who murdered the Pope. It is only because of mine and Griselda's reputation that the angels and the heads of the church take our words into consideration. Maybe we should see them, Issei pointed out. If they see us and our doubles together, if we show them the two boosted gears. That is already arranged, Dulio said. Lord Michael and Lady Gabriel want to talk to you. But the rest of the church? I will tell it to you like that. I don't know how it is with your world, but ours is simply not ready to know about parallel universes. And especially invaders from there, copies of people running around. This would cause mass panic and paranoia, even under the supernatural. I understand, Issei replied. Middle was with them, Rainier brought up. You mean your former teammate? Irina asked. Yes, of course I could not tell if it was the same Middle I know or another one. And also Kaneko, she said, looking at Kuroka. I know, the Nekomata responded. But that there wasn't my sister. Sharon died months ago. And her death was then avenged by Issei-kun and Irina. This was just another double. This will make the situation between heaven and the devils even worse as it is, far worse, Griselda stated. A new war could break out. Even if the leaders of heaven and the devils knew the truth, the ranks below that would never accept it. Not with the situation being like it is. But if we take out their attackers and bring them proof? Issei's counterpart asked. Then. Maybe, Dulio answered. Are you okay, Murayama? Issei asked her. She had stayed silent during the entire conversation and was now once again looking wordlessly at the ground. I have just killed someone, Issei-kun, she replied. People like you and the others here can maybe deal with something like this easily, but I am different. I had never thought I would ever do something like that. If you want to talk about it, Irina offered. I knew that this would happen sooner or later when I decided to join this group, she replied. Still, if you want to talk, we are here, Rainier told her. I had never thought that I would once say this to a human, she thought by herself. But the last months had changed a lot. Issei turned back around to Dulio, Griselda. Okay, we are ready now, if they are, he said. Dulio nodded and sent out a magical signal. A magic circle appeared before them with Michael and Gabriel in its center. They were looking nearly exactly like they did in their own world as they met them. They both were looking at Issei, Irina and Zenobia. And at their doubles. Then at Kuroka. It seems we have to talk, Michael said to them. XXXXXXX. A short time later their team was ready for their next transfer. The mysterious attackers might have disappeared into another reality. But they had been able to read the data which one it had been. Gariel had just contacted the home universe of the Guardians and sent a report. They had informed them for once that freed Selzen and the most likely other escapees from the Vatican prison were dead. But also that the group who was responsible for freeing them had escaped to yet another reality. Do you think they are members of the Dark Order? Irina asked. You mean the same group this Crocell had been part of? Issei asked. Gariel shook her head. The transport device they had looked completely different from the technologies that any of the factions of the Dark Order are using, she stated. A short time later they got the permission to follow them and investigate, to find out this enemy's identities. An open fight however should, if possible, be avoided for now. At least if they could. But they all had doubts if it would be possible, given how aggressive and dangerous this group had shown themselves to be. XXX. But not all of their current team would come with them. For once Ravel, who was not really member of the official team, would return home. Her family and the Mao had agreed to let her come with them on regular explorations and to help retrieving Rias and Irina, but not against a group of dangerous maniacs. Beside that, they wanted someone to inform the Mao about the fact that Rias had been found. So Ravel would return to their world. A minute later Gariel activated the portal that led back home and Ravel stepped through. Zenobia had also agreed to go back and reported the latest events to the church in person, reluctantly. They had thought about sending Rias home as well. But she insisted to come with them. Typical of her, some of them thought. XXX. And not all who would come with them were part of their current team. Are you sure about this? Issei asked his double. Of course I am, he replied. These bastards are on the best way to cause a war. And on top of that they have framed Kuroka for murder. I want to get them as much as you. I come with you. Okay, and you? Issei turned to Kuroka. Ice, Hyodo, or whatever I should call you, I have just been framed for assassinating the Pope. That means not only the church and heaven will be after me, but probably many devils will blame me for the trouble and want my head as well. Hell, they wanted me dead before and only Issei revealing the truth had stopped them. Now they have a new excuse. Whatever you will get into, I doubt it can be much more dangerous for me than staying here. Issei nodded. We would like to come with you as well Issei-kun, this world's Irina, said to them, but all exorcists had been ordered to return and keep themselves ready after what had happened. So it is us then. Issei looked to his counterpart, Rainier, Asia, Irina, Gariel, Rias, Kiba, Murayama and Kuroka. He opened the new portal. Whatever would be happening, they were leaving now. They gave each other a short look and stepped through the opened gateway. XXXXXXX Aquino's world. DXD Universe 15. They had arrived. A second later they were once again standing just outside of Kuo. Yet another Kuo that they had never seen before. But they knew that the strangers were somewhere in this world. Like in most versions of Kuo, they could also sense multiple sources of magic power and supernatural energy. They realized however very quickly that the number of devils seemed to be much lower than in their own hometown. Well, we are here, Issei said. There is something different here, as in our Kuo. I sense far less of the presence of devils. Fae are still here, but not nearly as many. But there are some other beings, somehow similar but different. You are right partner, Diedrich spoke up. They are not devils but somehow different. But still they seem somehow related. Likely another demonic race. Still, these presences. Somehow they remind me of something. From a long time ago. And there are also some other powers. I sense it as well, Rainier said. It feels like very powerful humans. I guess that means this Kuo is possible no under the control of the devil faction, the other Issei pointed out. Maybe it is under the one of these other beings. Or maybe the humans. That is good possible with so much fewer of them here, Irina stated. We will see about it. Let us take a look at the town, Issei said. I guess we will find out more soon, one way or another. And be careful, Gariel added. These guys are somewhere in this world. That means they could be on another continent, but also right in this town. Of course. We are already doing this job for a few months, as you remember, Rainier commented, a bit irritated. And I for over a century, Gariel responded. And look how that turned out. First your ex-boyfriend screwed you over and used you to get people killed, then you secretly run off to take him out on your own, fail and nearly got yourself killed in the process. Gariel's face turned sour as she was reminded of this. Rainier-chan, Asia addressed her. What? You are acting like a bitch again. Rainier noticed now how the other fallen angel had taken her words. Oh, I am sorry Gariel. I shouldn't have brought this up, she said. Sometimes I just can't help myself about what I say. It is okay, Gariel answered. I know I have messed up big time in the past. Suddenly they sensed some of the energies inside the town rising up drastically. A fight seemed to have broken out. They all were looking at each other. Was that them? They all thought. No, that was unlikely. The energies weren't exactly weak, but still too low to come from someone like Valley or Kuroka's counterpart. Still, it might be connected to them, and if not, it was at least a chance to find out more about the inhabitants of this reality. Let us go, Gariel said to them. XXXXXXX. In another part of the town, a group consisting of 3 Erebos demons, 2 men and 1 woman. All of them were currently in their human shape and wearing usual street clothes, to avoid detection, were standing together inside their current hideout, and small building that they had rented under the false name of an invented company. They were discussing the latest state of their targets. How do you think they will react? One of the men asked. They had just sent a report about the double of Akano Himejima they had located. Well, I guess they will send us to capture her, the woman said. Maybe they will send us some help to it and then. But then she was suddenly interrupted as they sensed a large energy rising up at the other side of the wall behind them. And then, one moment later, they heard a loud bang and saw the same wall cracking and breaking down. A second later, as the dust had set, they saw a figure standing at the other side of the resulting hole and stepping inside. The figure was a slim teenage girl, with brown hair and remarkable small breasts. And with an activated boosted gear on her right arm. They recognized her instantly. It was nobody else than their current target, Rias Mac Graymore. Hey! Top of the mornin' to you guys. How are ya? She greeted them with an Irish term and a slightly mocking voice. You. One of the Erebos called out. Now, have you really thought we wouldn't notice you spying on us? Issei-san had noticed you right away, she declared. Kill her, one of the male demons called out. No, we still need her alive, the other responded. Killing me? Rias asked. Don't you think a bit high of yourself here? The 3 demons materialized her wings and their small horns appeared on their foreheads. We will see about that, the first male said. We will just take you with us and our superiors can take you apart to see what is wrong with you. There is nothing wrong with me, Rias called out. Only my boobs could be bigger, she said with a short look down to her chest. Get her, the female demon yelled. She rushed forward using her wings, but a backhand from Rias, after a boost, sent her flying against the walls. Her 2 comrades joined the attack, but Rias was fending off them as well, mostly using simply kicks and punches. XXX. In some distance, the Issei of this world was standing, together with Sharon, Rainier, and Akano. They had just separated from Murayama, and Katase, after giving some excuse and Rias promising to join them later to spend some time together, and harassing some of the boys in their class. Should we help her? Sharon asked. She seems to be taking care of them quite well on her own, Issei pointed out. But there is something else, he said with a glacé to the town's border. A number of powers had just appeared at the edge of the town, out of nowhere as it seems. To be honest, I am much more concerned about this new presences than about these 3 creatures here, whatever they are. Maybe in this case you should unbind my powers, Rainier said to him. He gave her a short look. It was now a few months ago that he had bound the fallen angel's power, after she had lured Rias into a trap and tried to kill her. Or technically did kill her, if it had not been for Issei interfering in the last second to heal her and save her life. Like it had later turned out, she had been set up by some corrupt members of the fallen angel faction to do this. After the incident, Rias had agreed to become his apprentice, all too willingly, since the eccentric and perverted girl was one of the many female students at their school who had a major crush on him, as he knew. Her behavior was all too often more than a headache, but somehow they had still grown close to each other. Not as close as she wanted, but they were at least friends. "Come on. I have earned your trust by now, haven't I?" she asked him. "I have done everything I could for you and that human girl to make up for my mistakes. And in that way I could at least be a help instead of standing in the way, if that powers are truly dangerous." Issei gave it a short thought. After he and Rias had defeated Rainier a short time later, he had bound her powers and made an agreement with Azazel to keep her here until he would decide that she had earned his trust and made up for her actions. He agreed that so far she actually seemed sincere in her efforts and that it would really be foolish to leave her powerless and in need of protection in face of a possible threat to the town, when she could also be a help. "Okay," he said. He lifted his hands, murmured a few words and began a magic spell. A few moments later Rainier felt new, or rather old, power flowing through her. "Thank you," she said. Akeno sensed the energies at the edge of the town as well. At first she wasn't quite sure, not completely, but then, it was them. They had found her. At least they were one of the two groups who had appeared. "Wait," she said to Issei. "The ones who had just appeared, they aren't enemies. These are my friends. They have found me." "Are you sure?" he asked her. She hesitated for a moment. What if this weren't them, but counterparts from another world? How could she be sure? I sense Ria's power, I mean the ones of her as a devil. I have known her for years. And there is also one that seems very similar to your own. The others are too suppressed right now, but a few of them seem to be fallen angels." "That is still not 100% guarantee," he replied. "No, but the chance is very high, right?" "Okay," Issei said. "And the other group," he asked her, "the one who had arrived a few hours before?" "I don't know," she answered. Rias meanwhile used her powers to form two shields to protect herself from blasts coming from two directions from two of her opponents. The third one was currently down and as it looked he would not be able to fight again for an entire while after she had managed to knock him out. In response she fired back two blasts of her own. The two demons were pushed back, but otherwise not really damaged. Suddenly something happened that surprised all of them. Before them, something was beginning to shape itself out of thin air and 1 second later, a figure was standing before them, and it looked exactly like Issei. Rias called out. "Yes and no," the figure replied. 1 moment later he was taking a closer look at her. Rias," he called out as he recognized the unremarkable looking girl before him. And he realized that this girl was human. And possessed the boosted gear on top of that. He sensed that Diedrich could not believe it as well. Had the dragon been physically here, he would probably be staring with an open mouth. What happened to you?" Issei stammered. "Issei?" Rias asked confused. "Take him out," the male Erebos demons shouted. Both of them generated magic sources, that charged energy blasts, they fired at him. But the blasts passed right through him, doing nothing. "It is just a projection," the female called out. "Right," the figure said, "but a projection that can fight." He leapt forward and punched the female demon right in the face, sending her to the ground. Issei had learned a long time ago to give his mental projections actual physical form and the ability to act. "I should thank you actually. I have never seen beings like you before. Until a moment ago, I was not sure if you were hostile or not, but you have made it clear now." In some distance, the real Issei and his team were moving quickly to their position. They had flown into the town with suppressed energies and landed 2 streets away. Teleportation was something they didn't want to risk at this unknown territory. And not knowing exactly what kind of abilities these beings here possessed. "Okay, my thought projection had engaged them," he said. "And? Something interesting?" Rias asked him. You will see it yourself in a minute," he answered. If you believe it," he thought. Less than a minute later they reached the place. Issei's projection disappeared in the moment they arrived. Everyone's reaction was more or less exactly like he had expected it. They saw the 3 winged beings, 2 of them awake, another one unconscious, and the human girl in opposite to them. They all took in the familiar features, even if their brains at first refused to make the connection. She however was also staring at them wordlessly for a few seconds. Issei-san, she stammered. 2 of you?" she asked bewildered. Then the native Issei and his compatriots showed themselves and paired at the other side of the street. "T3 of you!" Rias now exclaimed. Her face showed an somewhat unsettling mixture of shock and excitement. Then her eyes drifted to the other newcomers, a second Rainier, a girl with chestnut hair and twin ponytails. She felt as if she had seen her before somewhere. Kuroka? Asia. A blonde guy, very good looking. And she felt how her jaw dropped. Her eyes felt on a red-haired, extremely well-equipped girl with long red hair. She sensed that she was a devil. Rias realized instantly who it had to be. Before her stood a devil version of herself, just like Akano had said, one with incredible large boobs. "What the fuck," she called out. That is it for today, guys. Hope you enjoy. Please leave a like and subscribe for more videos. See you in the next video.